Right, welcome to Thursday Thoughts. Now I want to start off with addressing my post from last week. And I didn't mean to offend anyone. I had the best interest of the sport moving forward, or the future of the sport in mind. And I probably got a bit carried away with the future. I meant to say those conditions will be part of the future of downwind foiling, and that as athletes, we will learn to train for those conditions and use the right equipment through better preparation and understanding different conditions. So from there's been a lot of, I guess, discussion on, minimum standards for a downwind race, or is it open slather and it's totally up to the wind gods. Um, I think a waiting period is definitely a good thing if an event can manage it. And an event in the right location at the right time of year is obviously going to open up for the best conditions. But weather is weather, and sometimes we get unlucky. The first year I did Molokai to Oahu, and the stand up was no wind and a big south swell. It was like 6 to 8 foot coming in at China Wall, and a lot of the Hawaiians and pulled out. A lot of the top guys who were favourites for the race pulled out, and it's the first time doing it. I'd spent too much money to not finish the race, so I'd make sure I paddled it and got over the finish line. Ended up sixth place, I think it was, my first year, which I was super stoked with. And I was stoked that the race went ahead, and I would have been really spewing if the race was cancelled because of that. Obviously, a sup race is different to a floor race, um, but in some respects, a floor race for the same distance is easier because of the speeds that foils can go. Um, so the discussion of minimum standards doesn't really sit well with me. And that's because of my background, and I'm going to be open with that. Like coming from a sup discipline, Molokai to Oahu, the first time I did it took 5.5 hours without any wind. The last time I did it was 4 hours, and that changes obviously depending on the wind strength and whatnot. On the foil, it's closer to 2 hours. So even if the conditions weren't great, I don't think it's ever going to take us 5.5 hours on the foil, even if we are stopping every couple of kilometers to catch our breath and paddle up again. So that's where my thought process has come from. Um, so yeah, my issue with minimum standards is it could mean that events do not run, and we need to, from living here in Australia, there aren't that many events, like ocean events for longer distance stuff. So minimum standards just makes it harder for events to run. Um, it also means events that could be running are not. It also, in my opinion, minimum standards um, won't progress the sport like open slather with a waiting period would. So open slather, I mean, it runs within the waiting period with whatever, with whatever options you have. So I really do. I'm passionate about this. I'll go into it later, but I did 20 beaches on the weekend, and it was 10 to 13 knots, but there was zero. It was basically a bay run in the ocean because of the direction, the timing of the wind coming through. The bumps were moving at about 16 to 17 k's an hour. I'll go into that more. But yeah, from discussions with people since the first day of the cruise on, I realized there are more factors at play than just wind strength training and choosing a fall. Conditions change from paddling out to when the race started, which affect the results. And look, that's huge. I wasn't to know that, and I apologize for jumping the gun and making some bold claims. But so race two looked slightly better, but results were surprisingly well, they were surprising. Like I wouldn't have expected um, the Spencer boys to be outside the top 10. I wouldn't have expected, Oscar to be outside the top 40, for example. But it came to Wild outside the top 10 as well. There were some really interesting results that I guess spoke volumes about um, the different specializations within the sport of downwind foiling. Light wind specialists versus strong wind specialists, and then everything in between. Personally, I think it's all a part of foiling. I think light wind foiling is what a lot of people, some people, that's all they know. Like they don't get strong winds and they go out in lakes and they downwind, and that's just how they do it. So I think if we're going with the wind and there are bumps, then it is downwind. And it is downwind foiling. And if you're downwind foil racing, then that is what that's what you're signing up for. Like, you can't expect it to be 20 knots every time. As much as we'd love it to be 20 knots every time, we'd all love that. Some people have strengths in terms of competition in lighter winds, other people have strengths in stronger winds. So you can't just pick and choose, or you can, but it's not up to you to pick, and it's not up to you whether the race runs or not. It's up to the race organizers. And if you're training for a race, you've got to be ready for all conditions. And that was the point of my post. The future of downwind falling, in my opinion, will include light wind races, because weather is hard to forecast. And especially in a race like Molokai to Oahu, there'll be times when rain comes through and it goes glassy. The difference is, in Molokai to Oahu being an ocean run, there's residual ocean swells and bumps from a longer fetch. Whereas in Crozon, we saw, while the bumps looked good, apparently half an hour, 45 minutes before they paddled out, rain came in, the wind died. Because there's not much fetch, it went more or less flat. And that's what I call bay runs, or short fetch downwind. That's just how it is. I want to quickly chat about San Tropez, where Fred Von F's race. He put on a logistics masterclass, but and I'm stoked that that level is being brought to downwind foiling. But from my experience in racing, realistically, they can't be replicated all over the world. So I'd love that to be the standard, where everyone gets in boats and they punch upwind, and these super comfy boats, and you've got options of foils and boards, and one board and multiple different foil choices depending on what the conditions do. It's not realistic. Like, not from what I see here in Australia. Like, we're doing runs along the coast, and like I said, in the weekend, it was a 1 day waiting period, and that's all they had permits for. And no one was jumping in boats to go upwind or anything like that. I would love if that was the case. I'd love for me to be proven wrong, but I just don't see it happening just yet. Not in my lifetime anyway. Or not in the next 10 years anyway. Chatting to Fred, who ran the race, he said that they actually got really lucky, because the first day of racing, it was forecast to only be about 12 to 14 knots. The reality of the race was that it was like gusting to 35 knots. They got awesome conditions. He said they got really lucky. And in my opinion, this is exactly why there should not be minimum requirements in place for a race, because wind strength is extremely fickle to forecast. And more often than not, we do not know exactly what the conditions will be like until we're out there riding down the first bump. So a bunch of us, I'm sure, can agree that you look at the conditions, you look at the graphs, you look at the charts, and you put on the foil you think's gonna be right, and straight away you get up and you're like, oh, I've chosen too big a foil. I've chosen too small a foil. That's just racing, and that's like understanding the conditions and knowing. Okay, now onto 20 beaches. I did a little video beforehand, which I'll show now. Now I'm standing up the top here of a headland, lookout, showing you the course that I'll be doing later today, 20 beaches. It's an ocean paddle race. I used to do it in the stand-up, but I have been doing it for the last couple of years on a foil as well. Today doesn't look that good. West wind, leftover north swell, and we're actually running from this headland behind me here down towards as far as you can pretty much see around the corner, and then it's actually a little bit upwind. The wind is supposed to come in, it's supposed to be it's supposed to be about 10 knots from the south, swinging around to the east. So not looking like good conditions, but I'm stoked to have a local race, and I want to support it by doing it on the foil and hopefully grow it in the years to come. There was an awesome race over in France run by my mate of mine, Fred Von F, the San Tropez event, and they got epic conditions. Forecast was for 12 to 14 knots, but they ended up getting like 35 knots, and it looked like epic conditions. They had a boat running them all the way upwind, got the perfect angle, and came all the way back. So that's an epic way to organise a race, but not many places have the ability for those kinds of logistics. Fred's definitely ahead of his game, ahead of the game in terms of like running epic events. So I'm excited to get over there next year for sure. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep supporting these local events that are allowing foils to take part. And my way of showing support is doing it in all conditions,
hopefully the wind comes up a little bit more than what it is right now. But yeah, in the meantime, let's all get out there, support our local events, and let's keep pushing the sport to what it can be. I'll do an update later after the race, just to update on all that. But yeah, that's Thursday thoughts for now.
Yeah, so you can see the conditions of the morning of the race. Once the wind came through, there was about 10 to 13 knots with a half a meter swell from the north. So wind was going the opposite direction of the swell. The wind hit about an hour before we started racing, maybe 2 hours before we started racing, but it was only in that 5 to 10 knot range. It jumped up to about 10 to 15 by the time the race was in place. I used the 1075R with a 120 tail, and basically I was doing 250 to 3 minute kilometers in the bumps. Um, Look, using a 1075 was definitely more cardio, but I was able to go faster. If I was going for a fun run, I would have used like the 1300S or even the 1540S. I would have gone slower, but it would have been turning. I probably would have averaged around 16 to 18 Ks an hour. But on the 1075, I could average faster, like closer to out to sea. It was like fastest Ks were, they said, I think I did a 248. My slowest was like a 307. We then even turned around flat water, and then it was a headwind flat water pump to the finish with super low tide, um, seagrass, which meant you had to walk. You actually had to walk the last couple hundred meters, which was, yeah, obviously pretty bad for a foil race. But Simon Stokes and I had a great. We loved it. It wasn't the perfect conditions, but it was a real physical challenge. It actually took me back to paddling on the SUP, and doing, like Molokai. Like I was pumping and working and reading the swells and having to work hard for every little glide. So I loved it. Simon loved it, and we really liked that part of the sport, which is light wind, downwind foiling. I'll see if I can get some photos and videos from that. But yeah, that's my Thursday thoughts for this week. A bit more I thought about this a bit more than last week's. I just sort of said last week's, and I think I was probably a bit maybe it was taken the wrong way, but it was to improve the sport. We've got some great conversations going, and I hope we can make this sport better together. So yeah, thanks everyone. Those are our thoughts this week. Out.